What was your biggest fuck it I'm doing this moment? I was a flight nurse at a company who liked firing people. We were transporting a patient from a car accident who became pulseless. Per policy we were meant to go to the closest hospital. Our closest hospital was 9 minutes away, however this hospital was tiny and couldn't care for our patient. 13 minutes away was a trauma hospital. Our patient was dead and statistically speaking was going to stay that way, but his only hope was the trauma hospital. I told the pilot to go the trauma hospital knowing full well this would be reviewed and I would be fired for violating policy. Fortunately the trauma hospital did a fabulous job and he survived. I was reviewed but not fired. Update further details, I did not expect so much interest. The policy is closest appropriate facility when the patient had a pulse, i.e. trauma, neurosurge burns, pets, etc. But when you lost the pulse the belief was any ed is better than a medic and a nurse in the back of the helicopter. I tend to agree with the philosophy behind the policy. Doing two-man CPR in the back of helicopter is very difficult and tiring, and we didn't have blood, lab work, etc. I also imagine most areas don't have two vastly different levels of care with just a few minutes difference. The belief is land, go to the ed have more manpower and more tools. If you get ROSC, get back in the helicopter and keep going. The patient would likely have 2 bills, but that is another story. Our belief was the patient was hypovolemic and needed a cordis and a mass transfusion. Getting emergency release of blood at small hospitals never happens quickly, so the argument would have been we made our decision on time to blood versus time to hospital. We probably would have still been fired, but it was our best chance. First time I fast roped out of a helicopter. I was just a photographer. Photographed lots of guys going out the back of aircraft over the years, but never jumped or roped myself. One day I was shooting some folks during a week-long training exercise, and they asked if I wanted to make a go of it. No pressure, the guy in charge even told me the aircraft could easily just land if I didn't feel comfortable. But I figured if somebody else can do it, so could I. So I got a few days of training on the tower, and then it was off for the flight. I was nervous as hell, even though they told me it was probably just going to be a 20-foot drop. As we got closer, we started counting down the minutes. At 2 minutes out, the door was opened up. 30 seconds and we unhooked and sat on the floor. It was night out and I couldn't see anything and I was hyped up with nerves and energy, but I also wanted to show myself that I could do it. Remember, the person behind me aid, if you get hurt on the way down roll to the side as quick as you can, otherwise I'm landing on you, and that'll just suck. And that was it. The person in front of me was out the door, and the crew chief was slapping me on the back. My feet went over the edge, and the only thing I remembered thinking was, fuck it. It was pitch black, but I remember thinking it felt like a longer drop than the tower. I hugged the rope close to my chest and kept my feet kicked out like they told me. Eventually I saw the bottom and landed more or less upright and whole. Even managed to get clear in a few seconds and get video of the next person dropping. Later I found out what was supposed to be a 20-foot top turned into a 50-plus foot drop. In the dark I wouldn't have been able to tell, but I'm still proud as hell of myself for doing it. Hitting send on an email I wrote my husband's mistress. Asking my now wife if I could call her back the next night after she called looking for a roommate who had moved out. We had talked for a couple of hours that night. She said yes. I called her back the next night. We've been together now 17 years, and got married 2 months ago. In the spring of 2017 I was contacted on OkCupid by an Australian woman in her mid-20s, while she was in Argentina. She said she liked my profile and that she would be in Texas in 2 weeks and wanted to hang out. I agreed, and then 2 weeks later she stood me up. She messaged me that night and apologized and asked if we could try again. I reluctantly agreed. When we got together we hit it off super well. We talked a lot about her travels. She'd been backpacking around South America for 3 months. She told me about how she hadn't really planned the next part of her trip, she just needed to be in San Francisco in 2 weeks to fly home. She wanted to do a road trip from Texas to California but didn't realize how expensive it would be and also didn't know if she'd even be allowed since she didn't have a US license. Earlier that month I had been talking to a friend in San Francisco that wanted me to come visit. I had been saving for a vacation. I own a truck and a mid-smallish sized travel trailer. Campgrounds are cheaper than hotels, and I was already thinking about making that exact road trip, which I had already done once before 4 years prior. When I told her all of that, she was interested but very skeptical. She told me she only half believed me. I was skeptical, too. A few days on the road with someone can turn into a nightmare if you can't connect and have fun together. For all either of us knew, the other was totally crazy. So our second date, I brought a couple maps and a plan. This was apparently sexy and impressive. This seemed to reassure her, and we discussed our hypothetical road trip. We planned on where we would camp and sightsee, and we decided to do it in 5 days, a pretty leisurely pace. After working out the logistics, we were both feeling better about the idea, but still unsure. I store my travel trailer on a ranch in the hill country, about a 2-hour drive from where I live, so I suggested that we drive out there, stay a night, and drive back, as a trial run. If all goes well, then we would leave a day later and split the travel expenses. The trial run was brilliant, and we were becoming pretty smitten with each other, so we said, fuck it, let's travel across the country with someone I just met. The 5-day trip turned into 8 days. We had so much fun we didn't want to say goodbye. After she flew home, we kept in touch almost daily for nearly a year. We still chat on occasion to check in with each other, and I have plans on getting an Australian road trip out of her one day. Proposed to my wife. Was showering and started thinking about how much I love her. Decided, fuck it, I'm marrying this. Got dressed and drove directly to her place to propose. No ring, no fancy speech or atmosphere planned. Thank God she said yes, and 6 years later we are happily married with 2 kids. Was going through some domestic violence BS and wasn't allowed to leave the home for months at a time. They tried to choke me to death, yelled at me a lot, etc. I can't remember all of it. My grandmother had died, and I'm pretty sure it was the intent to kill me and get my part of the inheritance. The inheritance money finally came in after about 6 months of this treatment, and while the other person took his half and went on vacation, I took my half and bought a Greyhound ticket and got out of there. Best decision I ever made. Sitting in a terrible apartment, listening to the upstairs neighbor play fetch with his dog in the house, after waking me up at 4:30 a.m. I'd been searching for a new apartment, but all I could see was my next bad rental. And so I ended up browsing Zillow, and stumbled upon a townhouse in one of my favorite neighborhoods, in my price range, with all the features I wanted. Stared at it for a week, then said, fuck it, I was going to end up buying a house in a few years, might as well just do it now. Things got kind of chaotic for a few months getting funds sorted and inspections and packing and moving, but I moved in over a year ago and absolutely love the house. Last night. My elderly dog, Bridget, has been going downhill for months. We had been hanging on for a while, and truth be told, probably too long. Last night we came home from a quick trip to the grocery store, and she was laying on the ground, barely breathing. She started to seize, and I knew then that it was time. I held her in my arms while the emergency vet put her down. I've never cried so hard in my life. Today, I'm a goddamned wreck. I can't eat, or drink. I didn't sleep last night. I've been in a perpetual state of tears since she passed away. I feel like I didn't do right by her. I know it was for the best, but I've never had to put an animal down before. And she was literally the best dog I've ever known. We had her for almost 10 years. Next month would have been 10. We got her as an adult from a shelter. They waived her fee because she was going to be put down if no one adopted her. They were low kill, but she'd been there for 6 months at the time. I loved that dog more than I love 90% of the humans in my life. I consider it a blessing that I got to know her. But Christ, this pain is terrible, and I don't know when it will stop, or if it will stop. And what's worse is the guilt. I tried to write up a RIP obituary type thing in dogs because I wanted some advice from other people who had gone through it. But the Automod deleted it because I put something other than just her name in the title. I gave up because I can't rewrite all those memories over. I can barely think her name without bursting into tears. I don't think I'll ever own another dog. This is the end game, and I don't think I can ever go through this again. Asking my crush out to a dance in middle school in front of all her friends, and a lot of other kids. She politely declined, but it was a victory for a shy kid like me to even do it. A few years ago, I was asked by a rather open-minded friend if I could assist her in planning her dream birthday party. I should specify at this juncture that her dream birthday party was, essentially, an orgy. Being the kind, organized friend that I am, I told her that I'd be happy to help her out, and I so spent the better part of 2 weeks organizing and planning an orgy, which, if you've never planned an orgy, can get complicated in less than traditional ways. The big day arrived and there I was, clipboard in hand and a fishbowl of condoms in my lap, and the party started. I was raised very conservatively and my comfort level with sex was, at the time, less than stellar, and I was terrified, not only of what I was about to witness but also because I didn't want to let my friend down. What if I'd planned a shitty orgy? That's a kind of shame you can't walk away from. It is also important to note that my friend was very specific about her entrance, and at the stroke of 8:30 p.m., she gloriously descended the stairs in a feathered, Hollywood movie star robe and then dropped it, revealing her fullback Tyrannosaurus Rex tattoo, and I had my very definitive of, well, my friend is naked on the stairs, there are 15 dudes and ladies waiting to bang her and this might be one of the weirdest nights of my entire life, but fuck it, here I am, and I'm doing it moment. At some point, I looked around over a sea of pasty white middle-aged weirdos and realized that maybe being a well-rounded adult is deciding that you want to have an orgy for your birthday and there's nothing really wrong with that as long as everyone consents. It was, weirdly, one of the most wholesome and affirming nights of my entire life. Wasn't sure if a girl has been chasing for months was giving me signals. She needed to do something in my city and wanted to stay the night. I said sure but didn't have more than one bed, so to avoid being creepy I offered to sleep on the couch. She hesitated. I offered to both stay in the bed, and she nodded. Cue 2 hours of lying nervously on my side trying not to come off as a predator while trying to make small talk. Eventually I realized we had been cuddling for like an hour and had progressively been getting friendlier and touchier, and at this point I'm just trying to weigh the possibilities she's just unreasonably friendly versus actually into me, and doing this while trying to be a conversation partner is slowly melting my dumb brain. I figure, I've been single long enough. I lifted her chin and kissed her, giving her plenty of time to recoil and pull away or stop me. She didn't. We've only been together for a bit over 6 months but she makes me happy. My goal is just to make her happy for now. A few years ago I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, yeah I know, make fun of me later lol, and we were talking for about a month before he asked me out on a little lunch date. Went on the date, had a great time, and afterwards he asked me if I wanted to go back to his place. Mind you, I was raised very conservatively and also to be essentially scared as hell of guys. My mom always said that guys just want to take girls to their place so they can rape them. Against all of my better judgment, I agreed and we walked back to his place. We had a good time, watched a little bit of TV, and after a couple of hours he walked me back to the diner, I gave me a kiss on the cheek, and we parted ways. We were just married on August 31st of this year. I'm laying on a hospital gurney, my wife was sitting next to me. I'm in the of the hospital where I was listed for a heart transplant, but I'm there because my bowels were obstructed. I'm wearing my artificial heart batteries and computer strapped to my side, my spare batteries and spare computer controller in the black bag in my wife's lap. I'm very calm because I know what's wrong with me. I'll be admitted for a couple days, put on a liquid diet, and my intestines will get back to normal. However, being on an artificial heart requires that I go into the hospital for everything. Suddenly my main cardiologist pops his head into my room. We have a donor, he says. I'm shocked, but elated. What are the chances that I'm there when the call comes in? Then he tells me, it's a high-risk donor. He died of a heroin overdose. No needles, he says. My wife looks at me, I think for a minute. My doctor says that he can't push me in any direction, but I have to decide really quickly. The hospital knows nothing else about this guy's life except that he is 25 years old, and died of a heroin overdose. Nothing more. I said, fuck it, I'm doing this. It was the 1st of November 14. Within about 6 hours, I had a new heart. No complications. No infections. No problems. I spent 16 days recovering, and I finally leave the hospital. After a couple weeks, I draft my thank you letter to my donor's family. I send it off through the New England Organ Bank via my hospital. About 2 weeks later I get a call from the social worker at my transplant hospital. My donor family wants to meet me. We talk on the phone, exchange email addresses, cry, and best of all, we make plans to meet. And I learned something while talking: my donor didn't die from a drug overdose. He fell and hit his head at work. The hospital that originally treated him thought it was a drug overdose only because he had shown up by ambulance unconscious in a city crippled by overdoses. It turns out that he didn't tell anyone in his family that he had hit his head at work. He didn't think it was a big deal. He ate dinner and went to bed. In the morning, his grandparents couldn't wake him because he was in a coma from a brain bleed. That hospital screwed up in a major way and reported his death as an overdose to the organ bank. The paperwork later corrected, but long after my transplant. I'm 5 years out now and doing great. I get together with my donor's family all the time. We hang out, do birthdays and holidays. We even get together just to talk about my donor. They are wonderful. TLDR, I accepted a high-risk donor heart from a man who died from a drug overdose. I said, fuck it, I'm doing this, and I've never looked back. Soon after accepting the heart, I found out that he didn't die of a drug overdose at all, it was a brain injury. Smoking crystal meth for the first time. I didn't actively seek it out, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. It was incredibly euphoric, too euphoric. I started doing it more and that led me to a 10-year spiral into a debilitating drug addiction. Clean for 3 now though, so there's that. My roommate from college worked with this beautiful woman. I mean, way out of my league. She was dating this good-looking douchebag who cared more about his hair than her. I went by the store where they worked on Valentine's Day and she was upset because the douchebag didn't even call her on, in her words, the most romantic day of the year. So I said, fuck it, and went down to the florist and bought her a bouquet of 12 red roses and told her that she deserved better than what she had. 2 weeks ago we celebrated 28 years of marriage.